My name Rachel. We'll handle this at home, Dad insisted after my sister's violent attack. The words hung in the stale air of the hospital corridor, heavy as chains around my throat. I remember staring at the linoleum floor, the tiles speckled with gray and beige, as though they had been chosen to disguise the stains of countless traumas. My father's voice was steady, commanding, the kind of tone that silenced arguments before they even began. But the doctor did not flinch. He looked at my father as if he were a man long past intimidation, then turned his eyes toward me. "Rachel," he said softly, holding the X-rays against the fluorescent light. "These injuries are not new. They tell a story, one that goes back years." His words sliced through me. He wasn't wrong. My ribs bore more than just the marks of this week's rage. They bore the history of silence. The sirens came minutes later, not for Lena, my sister, but for me. My father had underestimated the stubbornness of a man sworn to duty. The police arrived, uniforms stiff, notebooks open, pens ready to catch a confession that had been buried beneath the floorboards of our family home for years. I felt the aggression inside me stir even then, a seed of fury taking root. We lived in a 2-story colonial house on the edge of Richmond, Virginia, the kind of house that looked perfect in photographs. White shutters gleamed against red brick, and a porch swing rested motionless, like a prop waiting for someone to play the part of a happy family. Inside, though, the walls were soaked with secrets. The smell of cedar wood mixed with the bitter bite of bourbon. Our father's study was lined with shelves of books he never read, their spines stiff, arranged for show rather than use. He preferred ledgers, the kind that recorded debts in dollars and in blood. Lena was only 17, with soft features and an innocence that still believed in mercy. She had stood up to him that night for me. She tried to stop him when he lashed out, her small hands gripping his arm as if her touch could melt away years of cruelty. Instead, his aggression doubled. She was tossed aside like a rag doll, and when I tried to pull her back up, it was me who took the brunt of his fury. My body broke where hers had only bruised. The ER doctor's call brought more than the police. It brought a crack into the image my father had crafted for decades. David Carter, businessman, family man, pillar of Richmond society. To the neighbors, he was the man who sponsored little league teams, donated to churches, and drove a shining black Cadillac down Main Street. To us, he was the storm we learned to navigate in silence. That night, silence ended. I gave my statement, though my voice trembled. Lena sat beside me, her eyes wide, her lips split. "Tell them," she whispered, and for once I did. The police scribbled down my words, but I could see doubt in their eyes. Men like my father didn't fall easily. They had too many friends in uniforms, too many envelopes slipped under tables, too many threats tucked behind polite smiles. Still, I wasn't afraid. Fear had lived inside me for too long, and it had burned itself into something sharper. Anger. And anger has a way of keeping you warm even in the coldest corridors. The next morning when we returned home, my father was waiting at the dining room table. The chandelier above cast a golden glow on the polished wood, but the atmosphere was anything but warm. He sipped coffee slowly, his eyes locked on me. Lena hovered near the doorway, trembling. "You think you've won something, Rachel?" His voice was calm, almost amused. "You think one little doctor and a few officers can unravel what I've built? This house, this life, it's mine. Bought and paid for in dollars you'll never see." I wanted to scream, to throw the porcelain cup from his hand against the wall, to watch it shatter like the illusion of our family. But instead I stood tall, shoulders squared against his towering presence. "You hurt us, you broke us. And you think money can hide it forever?" "No, Dad, not anymore."
His laughter was cold, cruel.
"You're still just a girl, Rachel. You don't know how this country works. In America, power isn't about being right. It's about being untouchable." But in that moment, I decided if he was untouchable, I would become the fire that burned through his fortress. That night, I crept into his study while the house slept. The scent of bourbon lingered, and the desk lamp threw shadows across stacks of papers. I opened drawers, rifled through folders, searching for anything that could tear him down. And then I found it, an envelope thick with cash. $50 bills, hundreds, stacked neatly, secured with rubber bands. Tucked inside was a slip of paper with a name I didn't recognize. Victor Halle. I traced the name with my finger. I knew it was important. My father didn't deal in charity. Every dollar had a purpose, usually one rooted in silence or loyalty. This was proof. A connection to something larger than the bruises he left on us. For the first time, I felt not like his victim but like his adversary. Aggression pulsed through me, steady and strong. I slipped the envelope into my backpack and closed the drawer quietly. In the weeks that followed, the tension in the house grew unbearable. My father walked with the confidence of a man convinced of his own invincibility, but I saw cracks forming. Lena barely spoke, her eyes haunted. My mother, Margaret, drowned herself in the rituals of dinner parties and charity galas, pretending not to notice the darkness consuming us. But I noticed everything. Each day, my fury sharpened into focus. I studied the envelope, memorized the numbers, the names, the dates. I began to see the outlines of his empire contracts, bribes, the buying and selling of loyalty. This wasn't just a father's rage. This was business, corruption dressed in tailored suits. And I swore I would destroy it no matter what it cost me. The final straw came one evening when he caught me standing in the study again, my hand brushing over the spines of his unused books. He stepped close, his breath hot with bourbon, his smile a mask stretched too tight. "You think you can outsmart me, Rachel?" His voice was low, dangerous. "If you challenge me, I'll crush you the way I've crushed every man who's ever stood in my way. Don't forget, you're not my equal, you're my daughter." But I didn't flinch. I met his gaze, unblinking. "No, Dad," I said, my voice steady with the weight of my resolve. "I'm your reckoning." His hand twitched, as though he meant to strike me again. But this time I didn't cower. I stood rooted, daring him. And in his hesitation I saw the faintest flicker of doubt. That was the night I realized the war between us had truly begun. He had his dollars, his allies, his polished reputation. But I had something stronger, the truth and the fury of a daughter who would no longer be silent. The house that once imprisoned me had become a battlefield, every wall echoing with unspoken threats. And I vowed, with every breath in my body, that I would turn his empire of dollars into ashes. Because revenge wasn't just a desire anymore, it was my destiny. It was never just about family, it was about control. In America, control doesn't always come from love or loyalty. It comes from fear, leverage, and stacks of money tucked neatly into envelopes. My father, David Carter, understood this better than anyone. He had built his entire world on it. Every handshake in a smoke-filled back room, every construction contract in New York City, every name scrawled in ledgers that looked more like threats than financial records. They were all bought and paid for in dollars. But not clean dollars. Blood dollars. When I was young, I thought his business was just buildings and steel. I thought the cement on his boots was the price of hard work. But I grew older, and I learned the truth. Those contracts weren't just signed with ink, they were signed with silence, intimidation, and sometimes the kind of violence that never reached the newspapers. My father thrived in the shadows. He wore a suit in daylight, but when night came, he was nothing more than a predator counting his winnings. And one night he went too far. Lena had always been softer than me. She believed in people, believed that kindness could melt cruelty. She didn't yet understand that some men, our father most of all, saw kindness as weakness, an invitation to crush rather than embrace. She interrupted one of his lessons, if you could even call them that. His lesson was a tirade, a storm of fists and rage that left bruises where words failed. She tried to stop him, to pull his arm back, and for that he turned on her. When I found her sobbing in the hallway, her cheeks swollen and her hands trembling, something in me cracked. Not just cracked, shattered. I had survived his rage by keeping my head down, by taking the blows silently, but Lena's brokenness was more than I could stand. I swore then that I would no longer be his punching bag, his quiet daughter, his obedient soldier. If he wanted war, he had it. It was during those days that I began to search the house. I combed through drawers, through closets, through the very walls themselves. I wanted proof, something solid I could hold in my hands that would shatter his empire the way he had shattered our family. And then I found it. Beneath the floorboards of his office, under the oak desk where he signed contracts and sipped bourbon as if he were untouchable, there was an envelope. I remember the way my fingers trembled as I pulled it free, the way my breath caught when I opened it. Inside were neat stacks of bills, $50,000, bound in rubber bands. More than that, though, there was a slip of paper. A name written in my father's tidy, deliberate script, Victor Halle. I didn't know the name then, but I knew instinctively that it was important. My father didn't leave scraps behind by accident. Victor Halle wasn't a friend or a casual acquaintance. He was someone tied to this money, and therefore tied to the kind of business that didn't survive sunlight. I stared at those bills, and a bitter thought filled me. This wasn't just money. It was a weapon. A tool my father used to bend people, to buy their silence, to own them. And now it was in my hands. For days afterward, I carried the envelope in my backpack. I told no one, not Lena, not even my mother, who lived in willful ignorance behind her charity luncheons and painted smiles. I felt the weight of that money on my shoulders like a loaded gun, heavy with potential. Revenge pulsed in my veins, sharper than hunger. I wanted to know who Victor Halle was. I wanted to know why my father had given him $50,000. And most of all, I wanted to know how I could use it to bring him down. But it wasn't just about discovery. It was about aggression. Each morning I woke up with rage burning hotter than the day before. My father thought his control was absolute. He thought dollars made him untouchable, but money can be stolen. Money can be traced. And when wielded correctly, money can be turned into the very blade that cuts the hand that fed it. I started with whispers. I asked questions where I could, careful not to leave a trail. A name like Victor Halle carried weight, though not everyone would admit it. In the dim corners of Richmond bars, I heard murmurs. Halle, yeah, he runs crews up north. Construction, shipping, depends on the week. In hushed tones, another voice added, but it's not really about buildings, it's about control. You don't cross Halle unless you want to disappear. The picture grew clearer. My father wasn't just doing business with crooked contractors. He was entwined with people who thrived on fear the way he did. And the envelope of cash was proof of that relationship. I could have turned it over to the police, but I didn't, not yet. The police were too easily bought. I wanted more than just to report him. I wanted to watch him unravel, to see his empire crumble in flames. The aggression inside me began to show in small ways. At dinner, I no longer lowered my gaze when my father spoke. When he barked orders, I met his eyes without flinching. I could see the confusion in his stare, the flicker of unease. He wasn't used to defiance from me, and though he didn't yet understand why I had changed, he could feel the shift. That was enough to rattle him. One night, he slammed his hand on the table so hard the silverware rattled. What's gotten into you, Rachel? You think you're above me now? You think you can glare at me like some stranger? I leaned forward, my voice steady, sharp. I don't think I'm above you. I know I am. And one day soon, everyone else will know it too. The look on his face was priceless, a mix of fury and doubt. For the first time, I saw a crack in his armor. The envelope remained hidden in my possession, but it became more than paper and bills. It was my weapon, my symbol, my reminder that I was no longer powerless. I began to imagine the ways I could use it. Maybe I could expose Halle and let the fallout consume my father. Maybe I could turn the money into leverage, a bargaining chip in a game he didn't know I was playing. Every option ended the same, with him broken, his empire in ruins, and me standing over the ashes. I didn't want justice anymore. Justice was too clean, too polite. I wanted vengeance. I wanted to use his own methods against him, to turn his dollars into daggers, his allies into enemies, his house of power into rubble. And as I lay awake at night, the glow of the city lights leaking through my window, I whispered to myself, he thinks money makes him untouchable. But I'll make sure this money is the very thing that destroys him. Because I wasn't the quiet daughter anymore. I was his shadow turned against him. I was his reckoning. Leaving Richmond was like tearing off a bandage that had been festering for years. The air felt lighter once I was beyond the borders of Virginia, but my chest was heavy with rage. I carried nothing but a duffel bag, the stolen envelope of cash, and a determination that pulsed hotter than blood. I knew I couldn't destroy my father by staying in that house. To dismantle his empire, I had to follow its veins, the money trails that stretched into other cities, feeding his influence across America. The first stop was Philadelphia. It was a city of cracked streets and tall stone buildings that looked like they had been holding secrets for centuries. I found myself in a bar tucked into the corner of South Philly, the kind of place where men drank cheap whiskey and spoke only if you pressed them hard enough. I paid in cash, slipping $100 bills into the bartender's hand until his tongue loosened. "You're looking for Victor Halle?" he asked, eyeing me cautiously. "He's not the kind of man you just walk up to. He's got crews in construction, shipping, even politics. If you're smart, you'll stay clear of him." I smiled, but it wasn't the kind of smile meant to reassure. It was sharp, aggressive, the smile of a woman who had nothing left to lose. "I'm not here to stay clear. I'm here to burn his connections to the ground." The bartender stared at me for a long moment before muttering, "Then God help you." But God wasn't who I wanted. I wanted vengeance, and vengeance doesn't wear halos. In Philadelphia, I learned the first lesson of hunting men like Halle and my father. Their empires weren't built on honesty, but on fear. People whispered when they spoke of him, as though his name itself was a curse. But with each whisper I'd piece together more of the web. Shipping containers full of materials that never got logged. Workers on construction sites paid to keep their mouths shut about accidents. And money always cash passed in envelopes just like the one I carried. I bribed a foreman, a man named Jack Dunn, who reeked of smoke and regret. He told me Halle was moving money through a shell company in Boston. "It's all Carter's money," he said bitterly, his lips curling when he mentioned my father's name. "Your old man's building more than houses. He's building silence. And people are dying for it." The aggression in me sharpened to a blade. This wasn't just about bruises anymore. It was about bodies buried under steel and concrete, about lives crushed to feed my father's empire. And every new detail only fueled my resolve to take him down. Boston was colder, both in weather and in the people I found myself dealing with. The city hummed with old money, the kind of money that hid itself in polished banks and ivy-draped universities. But beneath the surface, corruption ran just as thick as in Richmond or Philadelphia. I rented a small, dingy apartment in Dorchester using only cash. I didn't trust anyone, and I made sure no one could trace me. My father had taught me once, in one of his rare moments of honesty, "Never leave a trail, Rachel. Trails are for prey." He had meant it as advice for surviving in his world. Now I used it against him. I found men in Boston who were willing to talk if the money was right. A courier, a driver, even a banker's assistant who had grown tired of watching dirty dollars slip through polished hands. Each of them was greedy, desperate, or angry enough to take my cash. I didn't judge them. I needed them. One night, in a warehouse reeking of oil and rust, I cornered a man who had been skimming off shipments for Halle. He was large, but fear makes even the strongest men crumble. I pressed him against the wall, the knife in my hand gleaming under the single hanging bulb. "You're going to tell me where the next shipment is going," I said, my voice low, steady. "And if you lie to me, I'll make sure you never speak again." His eyes widened, sweat rolling down his temple.
"Chicago," he stammered. "It's all moving through Chicago."
"Hale's men run it from the docks." I let him go, the knife still pressed to his chest. "Good choice," I whispered, stepping back. The aggression that coursed through me felt electric. I was no longer the broken girl from Richmond. I was the storm he never saw coming. Chicago was the heart of the beast. If Philadelphia and Boston had been whispers, Chicago was a roar. The city towered above me, steel and glass clawing at the sky, its streets alive with noise and movement. It was a place built on ambition and crime, where fortunes rose and fell on the backs of those willing to do anything for power. Here, I saw my father's empire for what it truly was, sprawling, poisonous, infecting everything it touched. The docks were crawling with men who moved goods at night, the kind of men who didn't ask questions as long as the money was right. I paid one of them, a wiry kid with tattoos snaking up his arms, to show me where the shipments were unloaded. "You Carter's girl?" he asked as we watched from behind a stack of crates. The question froze me for a moment. "Why would you ask that?" "'Cause you got his eyes," he said, spitting to the side. "Cold, mean, but yours are different. Yours look like you're out for blood." He wasn't wrong. I was out for blood. Night after night, I stalked those docks, gathering names, dates, patterns. Every time I peeled back a layer, I found another rotten truth: payoffs to union leaders, threats against workers who complained, accidents staged to cover up deaths. My father's dollars were everywhere, flowing like a river of poison. And the more I uncovered, the angrier I became. Aggression wasn't just in me anymore. It was me. I felt it in the way I slammed doors, in the sharpness of my words, in the cold precision of every move I made. I wasn't just chasing revenge. I was feeding on it. I hired men of my own, the kind you pay in thick envelopes of cash. They didn't care about loyalty. They cared about money. And money, ironically, was the one thing my father had armed me with. Every dollar I spent was another weapon against him. Together, we disrupted his shipments, sabotaged his deals, exposed his lies to those who had once trusted him. Piece by piece, I began tearing down the empire he thought was untouchable. One night, standing on the edge of the Chicago River, I looked at the skyline glittering with light. I thought of Richmond, of Lena's bruised face, of the doctor's quiet words, of my father's mocking laughter at the dinner table. And I swore to myself that I would not stop until there was nothing left of him but ashes. He thought his power stretched from the East Coast to the Midwest. He thought his money made him invincible. But he never imagined his own daughter would be the one to hunt him across cities, armed with nothing but stolen cash, rage, and an unbreakable will. And as I watched the river ripple under the moonlight, I whispered into the cold night air, "I'm coming for you, Dad. And when I arrive, there won't be enough dollars in America to save you." When I finally returned to Richmond, the house didn't look like home anymore. It looked like a cage dressed in brick and white shutters. The porch swing, once my escape during long summer nights, hung crooked and rusted, squealing in the wind. My mother's roses, her one rebellion, the only thing she tended to with devotion, were wilted and dead, thorns curling like claws. The shutters peeled, the wood trim was chipped, and the entire property seemed to sag under the weight of the secrets it had carried for so long. But I hadn't come back to mourn. I had come back to finish it. The empire I had tracked across Philadelphia, Boston, and Chicago had shown me my father's true reach.
He wasn't just a man with a temper. He was a criminal who had threaded himself into the
backbone of America's cities with money, corruption, and silence. I had followed the trails, disrupted shipments, stolen allies, and cut through the foundation of his empire. But the heart of the beast was still here, in this house, in Richmond, where his rule had begun. And like any beast, to kill it, I had to drive a blade into its chest. The night was thick with humidity, pressing against my skin like sweat-soaked cloth. I walked up the porch steps with a duffel bag slung across my shoulder, heavy not with clothes, but with weapons of truth, documents, photographs, and the torn remains of the cash envelopes I had collected. Every piece of it was proof of his corruption, proof of his violence, proof that the empire of David Carter was built on nothing but fear and blood. Inside, the house was too quiet. No laughter, no footsteps, just the creak of wood beneath my boots as I stepped across the polished floorboards. The chandelier in the dining room glowed dimly, casting shadows that stretched across the walls like ghosts of the past. I found him in his study, exactly where I knew he would be. He sat at the oak desk, his throne, a glass of bourbon in his hand, pretending the empire was still his to command. His face was older now, more lined, but his eyes still carried the same arrogance, the same cruel glint I had known since childhood. "So," he said, swirling the amber liquid, "the prodigal daughter returns. Tell me, Rachel, did you enjoy your little rebellion? Running off to the cities, playing detective, pretending you had any power in this world." I dropped the duffel bag onto his desk with a heavy thud. Papers spilled out, contracts, names, photographs of his men in Chicago, receipts from Boston, whispers from Philadelphia. And on top of it all, I'd placed the envelope of torn bills, the same one I had found beneath his floorboards. "You built an empire out of bruises and blood," I said, my voice steady, sharp as glass. "And I've been tearing it down piece by piece. Every deal you made, every dollar you laundered, every threat you carried out, it's all here. And now it's mine to burn." He laughed, but it was brittle, forced, the sound of a man trying to hide the tremor in his soul. "You think anyone will listen to you? I've spent decades burying people stronger than you. Money talks louder than daughters, Rachel. I stepped closer, the aggression inside me thrumming like a storm. You're wrong. Money burns. And I've lit the match. Before he could respond, I pulled a small canister of gasoline from the duffel and poured it across the papers, the carpet, the desk. The sharp chemical stench filled the room, mingling with the sweet burn of bourbon. His face shifted then from arrogance to disbelief and finally to fear. For the first time in my life, I saw fear in his eyes. You wouldn't dare, he growled, rising to his feet. This is our home. This is our prison, I cut in, striking a match. The flame danced in the air, hungry and alive. And tonight it dies with you. The fire caught quickly, hungrily devouring the paper, the desk, the bourbon-soaked wood. Flames leapt higher, licking the shelves, curling around the books he had never read. Smoke filled the room, thick and choking, but I didn't move. I stood there, watching him flail, watching the empire he had built in shadows consumed by light and heat. You think this makes you strong? He shouted, coughing as the fire roared. You're nothing without me. You've always been nothing without me. I stepped closer, the fire at my back casting me in flickering orange and red. My voice was calm, steady, every syllable a blade. No, Dad, I'm everything because of you. You taught me fear. You taught me silence. But you also taught me how to fight. And now I'm using every lesson you gave me to end you. The flames spread fast, racing up the curtains, splintering the ceiling beams. The study became an inferno, a furnace of every secret he had ever tried to hide.
He stumbled back, choking, eyes wide with the realization that control had finally slipped from his grasp.
I turned and walked out, the fire crackling behind me, the heat searing my skin. I didn't look back as the walls groaned and cracked, as the roof began to cave. I didn't need to. I knew what the fire would do. Outside, the humid night air felt almost cool against my burning skin. I stood in the yard as the flames climbed higher, devouring the house, lighting up the sky like a beacon. Neighbors shouted in the distance, sirens wailed in the city, but none of it mattered. All that mattered was that the cage was gone, the lies were gone, and my father's empire was reduced to ash. As I watched the fire consume everything, I felt no regret, no sorrow, only justice. America had given my father power, money, connections, control. But America also gave me the chance to take it back. To turn his own methods against him, to weaponize the aggression he had beaten into me, to become the storm he could never stop. Lena stood beside me then, her face illuminated by the flames. She was trembling, tears streaking her cheeks, but when she looked at me, there was something new in her eyes, not fear, but relief. It's over, she whispered. I shook my head, my gaze fixed on the burning ruins. No, it's just beginning. He thought he was untouchable. Now the whole world will know he wasn't. The fire cracked louder, collapsing the roof, sending sparks into the night sky like a shower of stars. And in that moment, I knew I had not only avenged my sister and myself, I had taken back control of my life, piece by fiery piece. I wasn't his broken daughter anymore. I wasn't his victim. I was his reckoning. And as the last of the house crumbled, I swore that nothing, not money, not fear, not power, would ever cage me again.